Grief is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Welcome to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm the founder of the Empower Grief Journey coaching and podcast platform. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares real conversations with people from around the world who have navigated grief, discovered the strength to create new and inspired beginnings. Together, we'll walk from grief to empowerment through stories, practical tools, and actionable insights. You'll uncover hidden gifts within your grief, reclaim your personal power, and step into a future filled with courage and hope. Today, I have an awesome guest with us. Her name is Ansley Ash, and she is making a transition from being a sports mom and library trustee to a full fledged novelist. She has loved mysteries ever since she was a little girl, and when it came time to choose a genre, mystery was the natural fit. She loves everything from Sherlock Holmes to Mickey Haller. She is pushing forward despite losing her father to cancer on Thanksgiving of last year, and she has worked hard to find a balance between leaving space to process the loss and moving forward. She is now publishing a series of novelettes based on a young female detective, Charlotte Charlie Snow, with several novels still to come in the series. And so, without further ado, Ainsley, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, hi Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. And I just want to say I'm very sorry to hear that you lost your father to cancer on Thanksgiving of all holidays. And I know people that have gone through a major loss on a holiday like Thanksgiving and Christmas, it makes that particular time of year very, very hard to get through.
Yes, and the thing I think that made it extra, I had a really complicated relationship with my dad anyway, but the thing that made it extra complicated is that Thanksgiving was my favorite holiday. So like it's just really hard to lose him on that. And not like it was ever going to be easy, but like on that particular holiday, it's really I don't know what it's going to be like this year. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
I do think it's different.
what's your favorite part about Thanksgiving that you enjoy the most?
So it's the holiday that's not overly commercial, and it's a holiday that purports to be about being grateful for all the hard work that you've done in a year, right? Like the classic story of the Pilgrims is like, well, we had a harvest and then they threw a party and they were like, don't know if we're going to make it through this winter or not. You know, winters are crazy. But we're going to have a party. We're going to bring everybody together and we're just going to take a moment in a day to be thankful for friends old and new and for the work that we did and hope that what we did last year moves forward into next year. And I just think like Christmas can be really, really commercial and Halloween is very, very fun, and so Thanksgiving was just it was about giving thanks. It was about family and thanks and friends in a way that I just felt like that just connected with me and I felt like everybody else loved those other holidays. So like Thanksgiving, yay, Thanksgiving, I guess is what I'm here to say.
Well, well, I will share on a quick personal note. Thanksgiving falls on my birthday every like 5 to 7 years in the ballpark, so it's one of those that I do love when that happens.
So much
So
fun, so much fun. Yeah, thank
yeah,
you.
tell me a little bit about it. It sounds like you got a unique relationship with your father, and cancer. I've been there with many members of my family through a cancer journey, but I'd love to hear your experience of that because people that haven't navigated a cancer journey with somebody in their family or someone in their life don't really fully experience what that's like, and it's very heavy. It's a very hard process to go through and watch, and I'd love for you to tell us just a little bit about that experience.
Sure. So the first thing that as in my adult life that doesn't tend to be as relevant as it was growing up is the thing that made my relationship with my parents very complicated is I grew up in a three-parent household with my mother, my father, and my dad's mother, who we call Graham, because my father was legally blind and my mother is totally blind. And then in the midst of growing up with all of that, my grandmother, when I was a teenager, 12 or 13 maybe, it became very apparent that she had relatively early, so she's in her late 60s or early 70s at this point, onset Alzheimer's. So I was a teenager growing up in that. So it's like easy to so I was very angry growing up because I was oldest child and a lot of responsibility was kind of a little bit thrown my way to drive my parents and my siblings and everybody to doctor's appointments and things like that. And so it was really difficult for me. Possible. And I didn't want to be an angry and resentful person, but it was difficult for me to navigate that without without being resentful of my parents, without them like stopping to think like, well, before you had kids, did you not think of like what this would do to me? Because they had fought over whether or not they would want to have kids. So I guess it was like a little bit like I knew too much about, how badly my mother wanted to have children, and my dad had indulged her, and a little bit like just growing up in a house that has disabilities, it's easy to be filled with bitterness and resentment. And I didn't really want to do that, because those pressures are they're complicated and they're emotional, and it can be very hard to speak up for yourself. I found it hard to speak up for myself in a way. So that it made it really, really difficult. And my dad was a little bit more of like a traditional dad, very, the psychologists say like I grew up in this house that was split 50-50 with like my parents had some aspects of parenting that were very democratic, and so I had like a say, and then there were some where it hit emotionally for them, typically around like things that responsibilities where they were very autocratic, and I just didn't have a choice. Like the punishments would come swiftly, but that does not say physically, just like withholding of privileges and things like that. So like it could be very strict in certain areas. So it was complicated. And then it was shocking for me for my father, who had been looking for his cancer for 3 years, to find out that he had cancer. I now live many states away, about 800 miles from where my parents live or lived. And so I hadn't seen, and of course it was the pandemic was on, so I hadn't seen my dad, like day in and day out. I didn't know how sick he had been, or that he was having specifically, but he had intestinal cancer. And I didn't know that he'd been having symptoms. But I did find out after he was diagnosed that he had searched for his cancer for 3 years, and the doctors just basically wrote it off, wrote it off, wrote it off. And so, of course, by the time they found it, just after Mother's Day, it was too late. So, and we knew that pretty early on. Um, and cancer is difficult. It's like you go through that. It's a multi-step process, right? Like, what is it that has made you sick? And then you find out that it's cancer. And then is there a treatment available? And then, like, what is the prognosis and how advanced is that cancer? And wrapping your head around it. And so, like, on the one hand, you get time. It's not like a heart attack or an accident, where like boom and everything's over, right? You get some time, and yet there's never enough time, and like you're having to navigate like that grief. So it was very difficult for me to lose my father. And there'd only been like one other case of cancer in my family. I know, and I know, like they say, like only 1 in 3 cancers are have like a hereditary, like can be hereditarily linked. Like 2 out of every 3 cancers typically are a combination of like um genetics and environment, like genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. But there had not been cancer on either side of the family genetically going back like ever. Like my dad was like the first, well, there'd been some like more benign skin cancers, because we're very fair-skinned people, but like nobody had had a melanoma, nobody had had, like a breast cancer or a colon cancer or even a prostate cancer, so like there had not been cancer. So it was very shocking to receive. Um, and then it was difficult for me to navigate. My siblings both live closer to home, but I live where I live because my husband is an only child and we live across the street from his parents. And so like he's caregiving for like they're still really, really healthy. So like we will eventually be caregivers for his parents, but he's an only child. We're the ones that are here, to be with that. So that was May, and my dad died at Thanksgiving, so June. So this was like 6 months, right? And so then it was 6 months of living 2 weeks in North Carolina where my dad lived and 6 weeks in Illinois. So it was really difficult. And during this time, setting down roots, we've lived in Illinois for 15 years. I had started a literary festival called Grace Lake Author Fest. And I am a writer, and I had joined, writing communities, and I wanted to give back to my community where I lived in and other writers that I knew, a marketplace to sell their books, because it can be so joyous, but it can also be like really daunting. Like, where can you start with that? And here I was throwing this festival that's like, it's beginning to get a little bit big. Like we had over 1,000 people this last year. But here I was throwing this festival and I didn't have anything out there. And I had all of these drafts that were sitting on my computer, and I was like, well, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to release them. And so that's where the idea for releasing, and the Charlies were all written. And one of the reasons that Charlies were written is because she's named for my dog. So I lost my dog. Basically, she had a bum knee and she fell and she broke her back. And so then, like, she had to we had to put her down, like quality of life, like she couldn't use the bathroom or anything, so like we put her down. I know she was really young and I didn't want to let her go, so like I have her in my locket, which is in the series. And I was writing these books, and so I finally got to a place where I felt like I was done grieving my dog's death, and I was done writing this detective story, and where these were contained, and I was done saying what I had to say about that. So now it was time to edit it and to let it go out into the world. Like I never meant to keep them all for myself, just to let it go out into the world. And that's when I got the news about my dad. And I had this crazy plan. So it's 8 novelettes and 3 novels. I was just going to edit them all and release them all over the course of 2 years. That sounds totally not reasonable. So the cancer really, my dad needed my help. My siblings, who were both nurses, needed my help. They needed me for respite care because they couldn't provide, the great quality of care that he got. They couldn't provide it at a really high level without being emotionally burned out themselves. So I had to go and I had to do that. And with all of that travel, it really slowed me down. And it was like, you know what? Maybe the really reasonable thing was, just the novelettes this year. And then next year, I can start releasing the novels one by one and take my time and craft them and not rush it. So that's kind of what led this. And then my dad knew that I wanted to be a novelist since I was a little girl. And so when the news came that he really pushed me. He was like, you've given so much to your family. Like you gave so much when you were a teenager and you gave so much as a young person. And then you're a stay-at-home mom because your kids. I got the oldest is bipolar and autistic, and the next one is autistic and ADHD, and the youngest is just a little bit inattentive ADHD. He's like, you've given so much to your family. It's time really to do for you. And so he really blessed it. So like it made it possible for me to go forward and to finish these books and to push them out in the world and continue this journey and to do it without feeling like I was taking away from something else. Because I had my husband's blessing, I had my children's blessing, and now I had my dad's blessing. Especially had my dad's blessing. Not like I didn't have it before, but he was very insistent that I do it afterwards. So it's kind of kept me together a little bit.
Well, I really love that he gave his blessing to you to write your novels. And I also, by the way, appreciate you bringing up that you lost your pet and had to put your pet down. I really appreciate that because not a lot of people hold space for pet loss. A lot of people, like when I had to put my rabbit down last year, were saying, "Oh, it's just hard to put them down, isn't it?" Or, "Oh, that's just what you have to do." And, "Oh, you'll find another one." And people brush off this concept of when we lose a pet that it's just an animal, but the reality is that these pets are with us for a very long time. Mine was with me for 12 years. How long was your dog with you?
So she was really young. She was, I had her just over 4 years. So when I got married, my husband, I'm from North Carolina, I'm from the South. And I was like, I do not want to move north of Virginia. I don't want to deal with snow. But then like his parents got sick and we needed to come up here. So she was my apology, because I wanted a dog. And like, she's just this sweet. So I only had her 4 years. On the other hand, they're so pure in their love for you. Pets are, and like they love you and they cuddle up with you and they're so unconditional and they're so non-judgmental. And I think it's just so easy to love a pet. And I think like not holding space for grief for that is very strange to me. Like I don't understand why anyone would I really don't understand why anyone would dismiss it. I wrote, I've written like basically 400,000 words, stories about my about Charlie, who was named for my dog. So yeah, like I can't. She was just the sweetest thing. And there are these things that you want to remember, and there are all these like little characters that help Charlie and her along the way, which are all the little other dogs that were in the neighborhood, that I got there. So like some of the texts. Some of the police texts, they have the names for, the super curious dogs and the the one that was just deeply offended when my dog Snow moved in. Lived on We live in townhouses and was at the other end of the townhouses and was like, "How dare you move into my set of townhouses?" Her name was Misty, so this became like my character's political foe, the foil in there. It's like so much just to kind of like preserve like these little rivalries and friendships that my dog had. And I just really wanted to celebrate that life, but like I didn't want to do it as like I didn't have confidence that I could do it as Lassie, but I had confidence that I could do it. So I just anthropomorphized everybody and I just made them human and like they live on their own. And I love these stories. But it is really time to let it go. Like I'm finally, and it was really a great time to do this because for the longest time I would open it up to edit and I would cry, and now I'm not crying. I'm like, oh, I miss her. So,
Well, I think
but
that's
yeah.
important for us to give space for our grief. And I always say that grief doesn't have a timeline. There's no set date that you have to get over it and let go. You're still very fresh in your grief, by the way. I haven't, lost your dad not even a year ago. And I really applaud you for being open enough and vulnerable enough to talk about that in such a space. Because when I was a year out from my losses, it was very hard to talk about things. And there's still parts that are really sensitive and other parts that fall into that place like you talked about with your pet that, it's good memories and oh, I missed that part of them.
Well, I knew I wanted to talk about it, right? I knew that talking about it was part of one of the things that I did. And I was overwhelmed. I felt like I didn't have the things that I needed to give. So, trustees where I'm at are elected, they're nonpartisan, completely and thoroughly nonpartisan elections. You're not allowed to declare a party. You're not allowed to be almost not allowed to raise money to run for these offices. Like it's basically knocking on doors and stuff. So, but I had to give it up because like I said, I was living 6 weeks there and 4 weeks, 6 weeks here and 2 weeks in North Carolina, and I felt like I couldn't be a good trustee. So, like, I gave that away. And when I walked away from this particular part of advocacy, I was like, well, I'm going to need to talk about my dad's death, and I knew, I expected to be alone. Like I said, it's really complicated to grow up in a family that has disabilities, and I expected to feel alone because it's very difficult to talk about. And, my mom and my brother and my sister are obviously experiencing the same kind of grief, right? And so it's like, is it this thing that's going to bond you together or that obligate? And I moved away. So like they're not there to lean on. So I really expected to feel alone because I was like so far away, but I didn't. I really didn't. My husband really stepped up for me. And then I did some things, intentional things because when my dad's mother Graham died, I got lost. It took 6 or 7 years to recover from that. And I didn't want to be lost in the same way again. So, so she died just after about 8 months after so I have two kids back to back after the second of my Irish twins was born, but before my son was born. And when I lost her, I questioned who I was. Like, and it was weird growing up in a house because my dad had a full-time job, my mom had a full-time job, and my grandmother stayed at home to raise us. So I was raised kind of like with two moms, right? With a stay-at-home mom and a working mom. And at that time, I was a very young mother, and I was like, who am I supposed to be? And I really quite I am because she'd been suffering with the Alzheimer's, I didn't feel grief the way I expected to feel it, and I ended up depressed. And part of that was just because like I was less than that year postpartum, so I was still nursing a child. And then part of it was like I was getting ready to turn 30, and part of it was, that I had lost her and I had lost this part of my identity and I didn't know how to integrate it. And so not knowing that I was going through grief through that process and then having a serious battle with depression really I went to therapy. I learned how to meditate. I learned how much exercise my body needed for my brain to feel right. So the thing that in my future grief processes is that I didn't want to feel lost and stuck. um I think it's normal to feel lost and stuck. I don't judge people who do. I just really hated that experience. And so I was like, what are the things that I can do? This is where, like, growing up in a house that has, if you do anything in a house that has disabilities, they're like, you have agency, you have to figure it out for yourself, right? So it's like, what? So then we're backing up and we're asking, what are the skill sets? What are the things I need to do to process this loss, to respect this space, to understand how complicated it was, to like there's still a part, where I want to love my dad the same way I love my dog, but like they're not they're not equal, right? My dog, like the worst thing she could do is bark at me, right? Um, and my dad, like that's obviously there's an argument, there could be an argument back and forth, there could be disagreements where my dog is just gonna love me um unconditionally, and then I can write that in my head any way that I want to and can't do that when there's a living other person on there. So yeah, so I just didn't want to get lost, and I wanted to talk about the things that I did, for my grief, like the importance of walking, the importance of understanding who I was, the importance of knowing that I was getting this, knowing that this loss was coming. What was it going to take to close those emotional loops and then move forward with my processes and move forward and feel whole and complete. And I can't say that I feel complete yet, I can't say that I figured everything out about like who I am without my dad, but I can say that I haven't done anything. My dad was a beekeeper. So we all have like little beekeeper charms that we wear, which I don't wear with this dress very frequently, but I do wear it. Um, and so like the temptation might have been to run out and like get a hive of bees. I don't want to raise bees. I might, like at 60 change my mind. I reserve that right. But I don't want to raise bees. I live in a townhouse. There's like no space for it. I'd have to drive, a million miles away. But I like again, it's an obstacle that could be overcome if I felt like I needed that connection to my dad. But instead I put it into the work. And so like navigating that grief journey. And then in my critique group, there is someone else there who is also navigating a grief journey in a slightly different way and also putting it into their work. So I have a bond. I hate to use the word bond because like I'm like barely a year into this critique group. But I kind of have a little bit of a bond there. Like I kind of feel like if we're not in similar places or going through similar things, we at least understand the path that the other person is on. And
Well,
so,
I think that's an important part of grief because nobody grieves the same. That's the funny story
right.
about grief is
Yeah.
there is no right way or wrong way to do it. There's not. And I love that you said a lot of very powerful things in the last 5 minutes, one of them being taking into control of what makes you feel good. I love that you brought up walking and exercise. That's been something really beneficial for me. And some people don't like it, other people love it. And it's a great way to release a lot of that energy out of yourself to give yourself a little more grounded feeling, so to speak. And I also love that you brought up, creating that connection with somebody because we may not experience the same similar loss, but we'll share certain parts of that journey that we can resonate with each other, or we sit there and say, "Wow, I wish I was in that mindset," or I appreciate you sharing that. I might want to try that. I just love your openness to discovering where this journey is taking you.
I think that's the number one thing I learned after losing Graham is that to be open is like I had to let go of the anger. I had to let go of my anger and my resentment. I had to let go of the external forces and the things that I could not control so that I could be open. That was the thing that I learned, so that I could be open to the opportunities that are in front of me. Don't always have the wherewithal to embrace them, and opportunities, usually are only open for a short while. But if to feel angry and lost or what angry and lost is how I felt after my grandmother died. And I think anger is very normal. I think especially after a death, like you're never going to see that person again. And my dad was also a writer, so like I can't pick his brains for ideas. I can't talk to him about some of the things, like I'll never be able to have certain conversations that we always had. I'll never be able to have those again, So I think it's normal to feel anger and loss, anger, especially over that. But anger is like also a masking emotion. And so like anger can cover hurt and you're not dealing with the hurt when you're dealing with anger. And anger can also blind you to opportunities. And so once I dealt with like my anger, I still feel anger, but I try to like, but I know when I feel it, and I try to like dial that down and dial that back and bring that part down. And then say, okay, well, I'm feeling anger, but what else am I feeling? And if that's sadness, to allow myself to be sad. And if that is loss, to allow it to feel loss. And sometimes I'm angry because what I feel is potential and I don't have my dad to share it with, right? But then here's the thing, by blinding myself to those opportunities, then I can't I take him with me, right? Like I have my bee, I can take him with me, like in a literal but also metaphorical sense. I can take him forward. So moving forward, I think is for me, I just didn't want to feel lost. I think is the number one thing that I wanted to do. And there were things that I wanted to do. And knowing that took it on walking, and then I also took some St. John's wort to like just
Mm.
center myself and to keep myself. Um, I cried every day for like almost a year, like from diagnosis to like after his death, it was like almost a year. I cried every day. And for the longest time, it was, wake up, cry, take a St. John's wort, cry a second time, take my second St. John's wort, cry a third time, take it, and then I was done for the day with the St. John's wort. But I didn't castigate myself for crying. It just told me like I needed help. Like my emotions were so big, I needed help to process them, you know. And then there came the day where I don't only cried twice instead of three times. And, after several days of that, then it was, I only cried once instead of three times. So like we're down to one a day. And then, it was every couple of days. And then I'd start forgetting to take it. And then I'd cry a few days in a row and be like, wait, what's up with this? And I'm like, oh, I'm not taking it. And then I'd go back on it, and I guess, really, I'm just kind of like off of it in the last 10 or 12 weeks. So yeah, I don't know. And then like we're coming up, I don't think I hear the first holiday season after you lose somebody is, like the worst. And I don't think last year's holiday season counts because he died on Thanksgiving, and we still had like all the funeral and all of everything, and it's like and Christmas was going to be ruined because he was, like we knew it wasn't going to last, through Christmas anyway, so we kind of knew that. So I think this is going to be the first year that it's going to be, for lack of a better way of saying it, real. Um,
I think the first year after loss, especially for me, was very, very hard. You get into that place in that first year of saying, well, what would it be like if they were here? Or, what would we be doing? And, how would we be feeling? Or you kind of get into this place of kind of reminiscing about what could have been. And that makes it really hard to be present in the holiday. And also, the holidays are really difficult, especially Christmas in particular, because most people have ornaments from over the years, and so you've got all these memories, all these moments of joy, all these things you remember about this person that's no longer there. They come flooding up to the surface, and like you said about anger, it makes people angry. Well, anger is not really a primary emotion; it's a secondary one. That anger a lot of times is sadness and wishing they were there. And so it's a normal part of the process, but it is a very hard first holiday.
yeah. And we didn't decorate last year. Like nobody felt up to it. So like I'm sure, that first time that anybody sees those decorations, it's gonna be extra hard. So yeah. So I did, if only was a trap for me, right? Like that was the thing that ignited it. So then, so like I try to then I do a mind shift. I do this thing where I do a mind shift in that moment, like, oh, what would it be like if he were here? Wait, wait, wait. Not what if, or what would it be, or what is it that I'm missing? And what is a memory that I can recall that where we did the thing that we wanted, right? And then I bring it up, and then I have like those things that I can touch that space and touch that memory. It's also really important to me to process it in a certain way too, because there are a lot of fathers in my fiction, and I want those relationships to stand on their own, and I don't want my relationship with my father to be at all reflected in the relationship my characters have with their own fathers. So that it's just important to me to like, I hate the word contain it, but I guess maybe contain is the right word, like contain it just a little bit, um, and to be as productive as I can about it. And, I'm gonna go see my mom in like 2 weeks, and I'm gonna go spend 2 weeks with her because my brother's going on vacation, and it's my turn to live with mom for a couple of weeks. So it's not like, so like I'm not gonna be over it by this is my first time back basically without him in the house. So we'll see. We'll see.
Well, you
I,
can.
it helps also, it's not my childhood home too. So
Well, you shouldn't have to feel like you got to get over it because I tell everybody in the grief space the whole concept of getting over it and letting go, it just doesn't exist.
I knew you were going to say that.
I've talked to over 115 people on my podcast, and not a single one of them has ever said that that works out that way. But what I have seen, by the way, is people that hold space for all of that, even the worst of those emotions. And I really respect you, by the way, when you said I hated feeling lost. I was there 2 years ago, and I couldn't stand it. It was the most awful feeling I've ever felt in my life, and it's easy to feel stuck there all the time. But what I try to tell people is in the middle of that loss moment that you're in, it's almost like you're at the bottom of a well, like an old school well you'd see on the in the Midwest kind of thing, and you're staring up at this pinhole light up at the surface. And if you take time to quiet your mind in that space, it gets you into this place of clarity, this moment of understanding yourself better. And I can say if you sit with it, and it, by the way, it is very uncomfortable. It's not easy, like Ainsley said. It's an awful feeling. But if you do sit there with yourself and give yourself the chance to just be yourself without any kind of premonition of things or expectation, you kind of figure out what path you want to go moving forward from that. And you give yourself a lot of grace and compassion. And I think it does lead us to a better understanding of ourselves.
I think so too, and I think it also, um, for me, it made me open to opportunities that were there, and so then the only thing that I had to say was, do I have the emotional capacity to handle this? That's a yes or no question. And some days it's going to be yes, and some days it's going to be no. And I think it's okay to say no. I think for me, the hardest part was learning. I'm a girl. It's the hardest thing for me was learning how to say no. Was like learning how to say no. I can't help you with X, Y, or Z because I need this time for myself. Yeah.
I love that you said that because that's something grievers have a hard time with is saying no because we're taught in society that saying no means it's like rude or disrespectful or not helpful or not kind. And when we go through a loss like losing your father, I haven't lost a parent yet. I've lost a grandparent, but I haven't lost a parent in the situation you've been in, so I can't speak to that. But I can just generalize say that those moments are very, very challenging. They're very, very emotionally weighing. And sometimes we just don't have the capacity to hold space for other people while we're going through that process of grieving a parent or grieving a child. We don't have the capacity there. And so saying no isn't a disrespectful, rude thing at all. It's actually a very good protection mechanism to make sure that you have boundaries with people and you're able to protect your energy and where you're at and not trying to I don't know if you've had this, Ainsley, I'm sure you have, but you have those really rough days in grief, and then everybody wants to start asking for things, and you're literally just going, I just can't. I just can't do it. I don't have the capacity for it. It's just not going to happen today. Um, and that's where you learn where you're at emotionally. You learn what you can handle and what's in prospect for you.
Yes, and my kids are a little bit older now, like my youngest is 17. So like they, like a little bit of boundaries, but I offloaded things off my plate. So I stopped being a library trustee. I had given up famous last words. But I had given up being a soccer coach and I don't coach my own kids. I coached other people's kids. I have a team this year. Um, but I think this is maybe the last year I'm going to do that. So I walked away from things and it was really hard for me to walk away from things because I enjoy being a soccer coach. I loved being a library trustee. I love, all of this out in the community. But if I did that, I didn't have time for my fiction and I didn't have time for my fiction and cry, right? Like that's the part of it is like, and cry. So for the longest part, it was the and cry. And now we're done. Well, not done. I'm at least greatly reduced with the and cry. I'm sure the and cries are going to come back. They did for my grandmother for several years. And they don't as much anymore. And I ended up in a space where there are places where I miss her, right? Where there were certain crafts that she would do. And because of Alzheimer's took her away from me, she didn't teach them to me. She started teaching them to me and like we got to the basics, right? And so like I'll sit down at my sewing machine and I'll have like this moment where it's like, oh, Graham should have taught me this. And like we have that moment and then I move on, right? And so I do expect like there will be spaces where I'll be like, oh, dad would have, and we have that moment and then I move forward. But I'm not there yet. I just know that it's going to be there in my future. And that was um and I don't think it's a race. Like I didn't want to get there as fast as possible, but what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to show up for a fourth year in a row to AuthorFest and have nothing to sell this year. But I will. I'm like the finishing touches are going into the paperback right now. So yeah. So we'll be there by July of next year. So for
See,
sure.
I love I love that you're prioritizing what matters most to you. And I think that's something that we all struggle with in life, whether we're going through grief or not, is really prioritizing what's important to us, what fills our cup, what makes ourselves happy, what brings joy to us. And I think that's even more important when you go through grief, by the way, because taking on a bunch of things when you're going through grief that just really don't fill your cup, they actually drain you or take away energy or put stress on you, things like that, it really just doesn't allow you to be present in yourself and give yourself the opportunity to heal. Whereas if you, like you said, writing fiction was very, very important for you, so that meant other things had to fall away, and that's okay, because grief really does that to us. It takes away things that no longer are supposed to be in the picture to make space for what should be in the future. And I think it does lean us towards more into our alignment, as I like to call it, what we're supposed to be doing, where we're going to be serving at the highest impact of contribution in our life. And I think that's a beautiful gift that comes out of grief.
I agree with you completely. And the other thing is, and then I just made a hard and fast rule with my grandmother is like no big life decisions. Like every life decision that I had made for 1 year prior. Right. Everything just goes on. The big life decisions go on hold. So, like, I'm not going to pick up and move house. I'm not going to buy a new car. I'm not going to do anything big in my interpersonal relationships other than my son graduates from high school. I didn't get a choice in that. That's just the way time works. Um, no, but no big me initiated changes. And then once just to kind of get like my stability underneath me, I've seen so many people my age. I'm almost 50 who maybe get divorced when they shouldn't maybe get divorced, um, because they're in the middle of like that grief journey and they don't know how to navigate it. And I love my husband and he's done an amazing job. So like I could brag about him all day. But I've seen people who did that and I was like, did he do the right thing or not do the right thing? Well, I think it's just really easy to get caught in the grief and like start blaming somebody else for really things that are highly emotional. So I think I think those were my two big things. Is like try not to get lost and stuck because it's awful. And I worked really hard. I worked really hard after my grandmother to find out who I was, to like hold on to that anchor and then, move forward and then, just work really hard on it. And then let the emotions come. If we have emotion, I feel like deeply we have emotions for a reason. We have, and this is a gift. You wouldn't feel lost and hurt if it wasn't meaningful.
Mhm. I couldn't agree more with you about that because I commonly tell people emotions are messengers. And the thing that I'm trying to change in the grief world is that a lot of people today try to suppress emotions or push them under the carpet or just pretend they don't exist. And what I try to share is that if you're driving down the freeway and get really ticked off at somebody one day because you're having a bad day, you're not listening to that emotion back here. It's trying to say something to you. So it's coming out in these other ways that aren't necessarily healthy or good for you. And I also try to remind people we're humans, we're built with emotions. And so it's part of who we are, it's part of our makeup. And for us to ignore an emotion is really denying ourselves an opportunity to better understand ourselves, better understand what we're going through. Maybe we find out we have a new perspective on something that we never really saw before, but grief happened to throw it in our face and say, hey, this is the time to learn this. This is the time you need to hear this. And it's not always when it's going to be convenient for you, by the way, and it's not always going to be a soft delivery for you. It may come in a very blunt, rude message sometimes, and that's just how those emotions work. But if you hold space for them without judgment, without being harsh on yourself, and learn to be
Agree.
kind to yourself and say, you know what, I'm missing my grams today. I'm missing my dad today. I got triggered with this emotion or this memory that happened or this thing that I'm doing over here. And give yourself that space to process it, like Ainsley's been saying. I think that's really the key to moving forward through grief or moving through it in a way that benefits you.
Agree. I could not agree more. It's
Yeah.
it's a difficult journey to be on, but I think it's one of the most important self-discoveries that you can be on too, is to understand your loss and why you feel loss. And you feel lost because you felt love. And so as hard as it is to let go, as hard as it is to like process that loss, what it means is that your capacity for love is there and lean into that. You have opportunities to love every single day and try and embrace that if you can.
Well, Ainsley, I love your story from the fact that you grew up in a home with disabilities all around you. And most people don't live in that environment, by the way. I didn't growing up, so I'm unfamiliar territory, but I'm just going to say it takes a lot of resilience, a lot of empathy, a lot of compassion to live in that environment and learn how to move through those challenges every day and really make the best of everything. And let alone growing up in that environment, but also then finding out your father had cancer, walking that cancer journey along with those other things. There's just so much resilience and strength I see in you as a person to be able to handle all that in the way that you have. And I truly feel like you have made just some insurmountable meaning through these things in life. They've never, like you said, it's really easy to get animosity or resentment built up for these things because it can cause problems in life in certain ways or prevent you from doing certain things. And for you to try so hard not to go there, but also to see the beauty in that journey, and be in the place that you are, I think that just says, you have a very big heart and a lot of compassion as a person. And I think those experiences have made you better off for walking through this grief journey. I think it's prepared you for that in many ways.
Well, but also empathy is the writer's tool. So, like, and to feel that. So feeling emotions is very important, I think, for a writer. So it helps me professionally to do this, to understand and to be empathetic and loving and kind and caring. And to give that to myself is the most important thing. You know, I'm highly extroverted, but books are in some ways have been my companions. So I write in the hopes that somebody will pick up my book and this will be their companion with them on whatever journey that they're on. It's my way of paying it forward into the world a little bit. So, and I think that's maybe a mindset my parents instilled in me. So I think maybe it's one part upbringing and one part just who I just who I am. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a beautiful gift. And I wanted to ask you before we wrap up the podcast, how have things been with you and your mom since your father passed away? Have you guys grown closer together? Have you guys leaned on each other for support? What's that dynamic looked like since your father passed away?
Mom is a little bit so my mom is totally blind, and part of that was she was raised in what we and like Americans don't have a whole lot of experience at, but she went to a boarding school. And so I think emotion is kind of really repressed in a certain way with her. So it's very difficult to understand what my mom is going through. So my mom does not talk about these things. She's never talked about these things, but we do still text back and forth. I would say to the best of her ability, it's been unchanged. I would say, like, I notice little emotional up and down, but I live many states away. And, my siblings are having a much harder time with their relationship with mom. And I'm kind of like on the outside looking in. But she did also, my parents had never been to see me. And after dad died, everybody came to see me this summer. So, like, it has changed some things. I think mom is trying in a different way than she had tried before. And I think it's important to her. And what's important to me is that I remain open to her, um, and love her. Like, she's still here. She's in fantastic health. So of course, you never know what's going to happen, but could probably have for the next 10 years. And to remain open and loving and caring with her and understanding that she is also on this journey. But no, mom doesn't share the journey with me, and I don't know that it's made us closer, but it hasn't made us worse either. And I think one sibling has grown closer and one sibling has not. Um, and I'm the sibling that's kind of like in the middle, but I think that is a function of how far away I live, not a function of the grief. But we'll see.
Well, Well, I just want to say a big, big thank you to coming onto the show today and being willing to talk about your grief journey and your father passing away. I just want to say my heart goes out to you. That
Thank
could
you.
not have been cancer is a nasty journey. I've walked it many times in my family, and I just have a lot of compassion for people who go through that. And so, I just want to wish you and your family and your mom all the best going forward, and to just take it one day at a time, one step at a time, because it's a hard journey to walk, but it's one that will give you guys a lot of remembrance during the holidays and potentially can bring you guys closer together in the future.
And maybe have some really great scenes. And I would like to say to all of your listeners out there, um, you know, for me, grace was the most important skill that I had to learn to give grace to myself, to be gracious to myself in a selfless way. That's the like take one moment to find something that you're thankful for today and then say like it's maybe today's been a hard day, but you know what? It's a day and I'm still here and I'm still fighting. And tomorrow we start again. Love
I
yourself.
think I think that's beautiful advice. I think we're all I'm guilty of it too, by the way, but we're all really hard on ourselves every day and we don't always step back and say, I had a hard day today. That's okay. I did the best I could with the knowledge and skills I have today in this situation, and giving yourself grace to understand that you can handle it better the next day, or you can always do something different in the future. I love that what you shared about that. Grace is a big part of the grief journey and helping ourselves learn how to heal from that place. Ainsley, I wanted to ask you if listeners want to connect with you after listening to today's episode, how can they find you?
Sure. So it's Ansley Ash Mysteries, ANSLEYASHE Mysteries on Substack and Facebook, and Ansley Ash on Amazon, where my books are for sale, and I will soon be wide. And you can find me on if you use that Twitter thing, but like I find fewer and fewer people are on Twitter every day, but I am Ansley Ash there. So, you know, type me in. I'm there. I'm also all over YouTube telling people writing things, every once in a while. Yeah, so like you can find me a lot of different places. I'm all over the internet, but Ansley Ash just basically everywhere.
For listeners today or joining us here, I'm going to have all of Ainsley's social media links and website links in the show notes. So make sure you guys check that out after you get done listening to today's episode. Ainsley, thank you again so much for being on the show. I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
Yeah, thank you so much and have a really great day, Chris.
Hey, you too. Well, I want to thank all of the listeners for joining Ainsley and I on today's episode of the Empower Grief Journey. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Ainsley's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Podbean. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know that you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.